A millionaire CEO pays a candy seller to have a child, but when the baby is born, he's shocked to discover that. Before we dive into the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Ethan Carter was a millionaire who no longer believed in love. After countless failed relationships, love, to him, was nothing more than an illusion, a dangerous game that gave people the power to destroy him. A practical man at 49 years old, Ethan had come to the conclusion that he didn't need feelings to achieve what he desired most, an heir. That afternoon, Ethan drove through the streets, deep in thought. He needed to find a woman who would agree to a contract to have his child, someone he could control without complications. He passed through busy city streets, but no answers came to mind. Where will I find someone who won't give me trouble and will accept my conditions? He wondered, driving aimlessly. As he stopped at a traffic light, something unexpected caught his attention. A young woman was walking between the cars with a box of candy. She had delicate features marked by hardship. Her brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her worn clothes revealed the daily struggles she endured to survive. Yet, there was something in her gaze that intrigued him. When she approached the car next to his, Ethan noticed her focused yet tired expression. She had no idea who he was and didn't seem to care. The light turned green and Ethan drove off, but her image lingered in his mind. A few blocks away, he pulled over and thought, "This is ridiculous," he told himself. But something compelled him to turn back. When he arrived at the same intersection, there she was. Ethan rolled down his window. He wasn't the type to approach strangers, but this woman sparked something different in him. Maybe it was practicality. Maybe it was the challenge. "Hey you," he called. The young woman turned toward him, suspicious, her brows furrowing. "Are you talking to me?" "Yes, you. Are you single?" he asked bluntly. Her reaction was immediate. Her expression hardened and her eyes flared with indignation. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice sharp with irritation. "Who do you think you're talking to?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by her defensive tone, but kept his composure. "Relax, I just asked a question." "Listen here," she snapped, crossing her arms and glaring at him. "I'm out here selling candy, not my dignity." Her straightforward response caught him off guard. He was used to people lowering their heads around him, but this woman was different. "That's not what I meant," Ethan replied, adjusting his tone to sound calmer. "I just want to offer you a job. Something that could change your life." She laughed, but it was a bitter, distrustful laugh. "A job? Do you think I'm stupid?" she asked, shaking her head. "I know exactly how guys like you operate. There's always a catch, isn't there?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying not to lose his patience. The situation was slipping out of control, but he didn't want to let the moment pass. "Look, I'm serious. I don't mean to offend or anything like that. I just think you might be interested in what I have to offer," he insisted. She narrowed her eyes, studying him as if trying to read his intentions. "And why would I accept anything from you?" she asked, her tone challenging. Ethan knew he had to choose his words carefully. He couldn't appear weak, but he also didn't want to push her away. "Because you have nothing to lose," he said plainly. "What I'm proposing could change your life, and honestly, it doesn't look like you're in a position to turn down opportunities." The young woman bit her lip, clearly irritated, but something in Ethan's cold and calculated tone struck a chord. He was right, even if she hated to admit it. Selling candy at a traffic light wouldn't pay for her sick mother's medication or secure a better future for herself. "Fine, but just so you know, I'm not an idiot," she finally replied, crossing her arms. "If this is some kind of trick, I'll regret wasting my time on you." "Great," Ethan said, stepping out of his car and pointing to a nearby cafe. "We can talk more over there." She hesitated for a few seconds, but eventually followed him. As they sat down, Ethan took a closer look at her. Despite her simple clothes and the exhaustion on her face, she had a natural beauty and inner strength that he rarely saw in others. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lucy. Lucy Scott. Now just tell me what you want." "My name is Ethan Carter," he began, wasting no time. "And I want you to have a child for me." Lucy blinked, confused, as if she hadn't heard him right. "A son?" she repeated, incredulous. "Is this a joke?" "No. You heard me right. I want you to be the mother of my child. I don't want a relationship or any complications, just a clear agreement." I'll cover all your expenses, pay you a generous amount at the end, and that's it." Lucy stared at him, her expression shifting between disbelief and fury. "Are you serious? Is this how you handle everything? Just throwing money at people?" Ethan remained calm. Money simplifies things. No drama, no confusion. She laughed, but there was more bitterness than humor in her laughter. "You think you can buy anything, don't you?" "Most things, yes," he replied without flinching. Lucy stood up abruptly, crossing her arms and glaring at him with disdain. "Well, I'm not one of those things," she snapped. "You might be rich, but you're a first-class jerk." "Maybe I am," Ethan admitted with a faint smile. "But my offer still stands." Lucy studied him for a moment, battling her own thoughts. She wanted to yell at him, call him insane, but deep down, she knew she was cornered. Her life was falling apart, and he knew it. Before leaving, she faced him again. "If I think about it, will you leave me alone?" Ethan nodded. "My number's on here," he said, handing her a business card. Lucy took the card reluctantly and walked out of the cafe without looking back. She hated the idea of even considering it, but she knew she might not have a choice. Lucy walked quickly through the streets of Los Angeles, clutching Ethan's card. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. On one hand, she wanted to tear up the piece of paper and forget about his absurd proposal. On the other, she couldn't ignore the crushing reality waiting for her at home. She lived in a small apartment on the city's outskirts, a place that felt more like a constant reminder of her struggles than a home. When she walked in, she found her mother, Grace, sitting in an armchair, coughing relentlessly. The sound was harsh, as if every breath was a painful effort. "Mom, are you okay?" Lucy asked, rushing to her side and holding her hand. Grace tried to smile, but the exhaustion in her eyes was unmistakable. "I'm fine. Just need to rest a little, sweetheart. How was your day?" Lucy hesitated, her mind flashing back to Ethan and his outrageous offer. It was normal. She got up and went to the kitchen where she found her mother's nearly empty medicine bottles. A knot formed in her stomach. The medication was expensive, and last month's bills had already drained everything she'd managed to earn selling candy. As she washed her hands, thoughts of Ethan's proposal crept in. He was arrogant, cold, and obviously used to getting whatever he wanted with money. But the amount he offered could completely change her life. And, more importantly, ensure her mother got the medical care she desperately needed. That night, while her mother slept, Lucy sat at the kitchen table, staring at Ethan's card. "I would never do something like this," she thought. But the image of Grace struggling to breathe and the growing pile of bills made her reconsider. Lucy collapsed onto her bed, torn. As she stared at the ceiling, she realized she might not have a choice. The next morning, Lucy decided to call Ethan. Her hand trembled as she dialed the number, but she knew she needed to at least hear more about what he was offering. "Ethan Carter," he answered, his voice steady and emotionless. "It's Lucy. Lucy Scott." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a satisfied tone. "I'm glad you called." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Lucy replied, her voice laced with distrust. "I need more details before I make any decisions." Ethan agreed to meet her at the same cafe that afternoon. When Lucy arrived, he was already seated, a folder on the table, and his posture impeccable. "I didn't think you'd call," he said as she sat down. "I almost didn't," Lucy admitted, crossing her arms. "But I need to know what you're really proposing." Ethan opened the folder and slid a contract toward her. "Here are the terms. You'll have full medical and financial support during the pregnancy. You'll stay in a comfortable place, have access to anything you need, and at the end, you'll receive a sum of $500,000. Lucy blinked, stunned by the amount. It was enough to pay for all her mother's treatments, clear her debts, and still have a fresh start. "And what do you want in return?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I want a child. An heir. You'll have no responsibility after the birth. All rights will be mine, and you'll leave the child with me." Lucy picked up the contract and started reading. Each clause seemed colder and more calculated than the last. Everything was controlled, from medical checkups to the type of diet she would need to follow during the pregnancy. "This is so impersonal," she said, looking at him. "That's how I like to keep things," Ethan replied without hesitation. Lucy closed the contract and placed it back on the table. "Do you really think you can buy people like they're commodities?" Ethan crossed his arms and stared at her, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not buying you, Lucy. I'm offering you a business deal, and business deals have clear rules. Rules that you get to make up, of course," she shot back, feeling her anger rise. "It's not an imposition, it's a choice," he said calmly. "You're here because you want to hear what I have to say, and you know I'm offering something no one else can." Lucy stayed silent, his words echoing in her mind. She hated to admit it, but he was right. No other opportunity like this was going to come along. "I need time to think," she said, standing up. Ethan nodded. "Don't take too long. The offer has a deadline." Lucy left the cafe with the contract in her hands. Her head was spinning as she tried to decide what to do. On one hand, Ethan's proposal seemed like the solution to all her problems. On the other hand, it meant giving up something she wasn't even sure she could handle emotionally. Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. When Lucy got home, she found Grace lying on the couch, coughing again. She walked over and gently stroked her mother's hair, trying to ignore the weight of the decision she had to make. "Are you okay, Mom?" Lucy asked, hiding her worry. Grace smiled, though her breathing was still labored. "I'm fine. I just worry about you, Lucy. You've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders for me." Lucy felt her eyes fill with tears but quickly looked away. "Don't worry about me. I'll figure it out." Grace held her hand, as if sensing the burden Lucy was carrying. "You deserve better, my dear. Don't let anyone take that away from you." That night, Lucy stayed up late, reading Ethan's contract over and over. Each clause seemed heavier in her mind, but the image of her mother and the pile of medical bills was stronger. Lucy knew Ethan was cold and controlling, but maybe he was her only chance to save the most important person in her life. Lucy gripped her phone tightly as she waited for Ethan to answer. Her heart was racing, and the sound of the ringing felt like a drum echoing in her head. When his voice finally came through, firm and emotionless, Lucy took a deep breath. "Ethan Carter," he said. "It's Lucy," she replied, her voice slightly hesitant. There was a brief pause. "I assume you've made a decision," Ethan said, as if he already knew what she was going to say. Lucy clenched her teeth. His confident tone irritated her, but she knew she needed to stay focused. "I want to discuss the details," she replied. Ethan agreed to meet with her the next morning, this time at his office. When Lucy arrived, a wave of nervousness washed over her. The building was imposing, a skyscraper that seemed to stretch into the clouds. As she walked through the pristine marble lobby, she felt out of place. When she entered Ethan's office, she found him seated behind a massive glass desk overlooking the city. He seemed as distant and calculating as before, but there was something in his eyes, a cold determination that was unshakable. "I'm glad you came," he said bluntly, motioning to the chair in front of his desk. Lucy sat down, crossing her arms. "Let's get straight to the point, Ethan. I want some guarantees before I sign anything." He raised his eyebrows, surprised by her firm tone, but he didn't seem bothered. "Of course. I'm here to answer all your questions." Lucy took a deep breath and opened the contract she had brought with her. "First, my mother. She needs medical care, and that has to be part of the deal. I want you to cover her treatment while I'm pregnant." Ethan leaned slightly forward, analyzing her. "That wasn't in the original contract, but I can agree to it. Your mother will receive all the care she needs." Lucy nodded but didn't relax. "Second, I need to be sure that even after the child is born, you'll stick to the terms. I don't want you changing anything halfway through." "Lucy, I'm a businessman," Ethan said, his tone carrying a hint of impatience. "When I sign something, I stick to it. You'll have everything documented and legalized. There's no need to worry about that." She watched him for a moment, trying to gauge if he was being sincere. There was something about Ethan that made her uneasy, but at the same time, he seemed so self-assured that it was hard to doubt him. "And what about where I'll live?" she asked. Ethan opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. "You'll move to one of my properties. It's comfortable, secure, and fully equipped. I want to make sure you have everything you need for a smooth pregnancy." Lucy took the envelope and quickly glanced at the photos. The house was far more luxurious than anything she had ever seen. "And what if I don't adjust?" she asked, lifting her eyes to him. Ethan let out a sigh. "Lucy, this isn't an ordinary offer. I'm giving you a chance to get out of your current situation and secure a future for yourself and your mother. But if you feel you can't hold up your end of the deal, we can end this conversation right now." His cold tone annoyed her, but at the same time, he wasn't wrong. She knew she couldn't afford to turn down this opportunity. Lucy took a deep breath before picking up the pen on the table. "Fine, I'll do it." Ethan watched as she signed the contract. Once she finished, he took the paper, checked the signatures, and placed it in the safe behind his desk. "Welcome to the agreement, Lucy," he said, extending his hand. She looked at his hand for a moment before shaking it. Ethan's grip was firm, but not as cold as she had expected. That same afternoon, a driver took Lucy to her new home. When she arrived, she was speechless. It was a 2-story mansion surrounded by meticulously landscaped gardens. The furniture was elegant, and every detail seemed designed for comfort. Stephanie, Ethan's personal assistant, greeted her with a warm smile. "Lucy, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm here to help with anything you need." Lucy returned the smile, though she still felt out of place. "Thank you." Stephanie gave her a tour of the house, including the master bedroom, which looked like something out of a design magazine. Lucy didn't know whether to feel grateful or uncomfortable. It was all too much for someone who was used to living with so little. In the days that followed, Lucy began adjusting to her new routine. The doctors hired by Ethan performed all the necessary tests, and she was informed that the process to conceive would begin soon. Despite the polite treatment from Stephanie and the medical staff, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling of being constantly monitored. As expected, Ethan kept his distance. He only appeared to review reports about her health and ensure the plan was being strictly followed. One evening, Lucy ran into him in the living room. He was reviewing documents, but paused when he noticed her. "How are you settling in?" he asked without looking up from the papers. "It's different," she replied cautiously. "I still feel like I don't belong here." Ethan finally looked up. "You don't have to feel that way. This is all part of the agreement. I want you to be comfortable." Lucy let out a humorless laugh. "Comfortable? It's hard to feel comfortable when my life is completely out of my control right now." Ethan leaned back in his chair, seeming to consider her words. "I understand how this might feel strange, but this was your choice. No one forced you to accept." Lucy felt her anger rise. "And do you think it was an easy choice?" "I don't think you understand what it's like to make decisions out of desperation, Ethan. You only understand giving orders and being in control." The silence between them grew heavy. Ethan stood, adjusting his tie, but before leaving, he replied, "Maybe you're right, Lucy, but control is the only thing that always works." She watched him walk away, feeling a mix of anger and frustration. He was so cold, so unable to see beyond his own world. That night, Lucy went to her room and stared out the window. The mansion was quiet, almost oppressive, yet it represented an opportunity she never imagined having. Her mother's face came to mind, and Lucy knew that no matter how difficult it was to deal with Ethan, she would do it for her mother. Lucy woke up to the sound of the alarm Stephanie had set the night before. She still wasn't used to the enormous bed or the feeling of soft sheets, but the new environment was starting to feel familiar. Or at least, that's what she told herself. That morning, she had another round of tests with Ethan's medical team. Since signing the contract, her life had revolved around schedules, rules, and clinical procedures. Everything was closely supervised, and though it wasn't explicitly stated, Lucy knew Ethan expected everything to go smoothly. After having breakfast prepared by professional chefs, Lucy couldn't ignore the growing discomfort inside her. Everything felt so surreal. The spacious kitchen, filled with expensive appliances, was a stark contrast to the tiny studio apartment where she and her mother used to share a single loaf of bread in the morning. While waiting for Stephanie to pick her up for the appointment, Lucy wandered around the house. Every room seemed larger than her entire old apartment. The mansion screamed wealth, but at the same time, it felt empty, soulless. When Stephanie arrived, Lucy followed her to the black car parked in the driveway. On the way to the clinic, the assistant tried to make small talk, but Lucy answered in monosyllables. She wasn't in the mood for conversation. At the clinic, the doctors explained the next steps. The fertilization procedure would take place soon, and Lucy felt the weight of that reality pressing down on her. Everything was moving too fast. Even though she had known what she was getting into, the thought of carrying Ethan Carter's child suddenly felt more real and more terrifying. Back at the mansion, Lucy found Ethan sitting in the living room. It was rare to see him there, which surprised her. He was reading some documents but looked up as soon as he noticed her enter. "How was the appointment?" he asked directly. "Everything seems normal, according to them," Lucy replied, crossing her arms. "It looks like everything is going exactly as you planned." Ethan shrugged. "That's how things should be. Planning prevents mistakes." Lucy let out a humorless laugh. "Of course, because you never make mistakes, right?" Ethan stared at her, clearly irritated by her tone. "I prefer not to leave room for mistakes." "That's different." Shaking her head in disbelief, Lucy responded, "You really think you can control everything, don't you, even someone else's pregnancy?" Closing the file he was reading, Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I control what I can. That's how I got where I am." "And do you think that makes you happy?" Lucy asked without hesitation. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan maintained his serious expression, but something in his eyes seemed to falter. Without responding, he stood, gathered his documents, and left the room. Lucy sighed, feeling like the conversation had gone nowhere. She knew Ethan was a cold, practical man, but deep down, there was something about him that intrigued her, a void that seemed as vast as her own. In the days that followed, Lucy settled into her new routine. Medical appointments, daily care, and luxurious dinners prepared by the mansion's staff became her new normal. But despite the comfort, she felt alone. One evening, as she explored the mansion, she came across a locked door at the end of a hallway. It was different from the others, more solid, with a rarely used lock. Curious, Lucy tried to open it, but the door didn't budge. The next day, she asked Stephanie about the door. "That's Mr. Carter's private office. He keeps important things there. No one is allowed in without his permission," the assistant explained cautiously. Lucy knew there was more to that office, but she decided to let it go, for now. A few days later, Ethan showed up for dinner, which was rare. He looked tired but maintained his usual impeccable composure. As they ate, Lucy decided to start a conversation, more out of boredom than genuine interest. "Do you work all the time?" she asked while cutting a piece of meat. Ethan looked up, surprised by the question. "Pretty much." "That must be exhausting," she commented, trying to sound casual. "It's necessary," he replied flatly. Lucy shook her head. "You talk like life is nothing but work. Don't you think something's missing?" Ethan paused for a moment, as if reflecting. "I had different priorities in the past. Now, this is enough." Lucy noticed something hidden in his words but decided not to press further. Instead, she changed the subject. "Are you always like this? Everything has to be controlled?" Ethan gave a slight smile, though it lacked any warmth. "I don't see a problem with wanting things to go as planned." Lucy chuckled. "And what happens when things don't go as planned? What do you do?" His expression tightened, visibly uncomfortable with the question. "I don't let that happen." The conversation ended there, but Lucy could sense that Ethan was hiding something. A vulnerable side he was determined to keep buried. That night, Lucy stood on her bedroom balcony, staring at the city lights in the distance. The mansion was quiet, almost oppressive. Despite all the comfort Ethan had provided, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. She thought about her mother, about how Grace must be feeling alone in that small apartment. Lucy knew she was doing all of this for her, but the distance between them grew heavier with each passing day. As she stared at the horizon, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw Ethan standing in the doorway. "I didn't realize you were still up," he said. "I can't sleep," Lucy replied. Ethan stepped closer, joining her on the balcony. "It's strange being here, isn't it?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. Lucy glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "You have no idea." For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the city lights. Lucy sensed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if, for just a moment, Ethan was letting his guard down. "Maybe you're right," he said, breaking the silence. "Right about what?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "About life not being just about control." Lucy looked at him, trying to understand what he really meant. But before she could ask, he stepped away. "Good night, Lucy," he said, walking out. She remained on the balcony, staring at the sky. For the first time, she felt that Ethan might be starting to change, even if just a little. Lucy could barely process what Stephanie had just told her over the phone. The fertilization process had been a success, and the doctor wanted to confirm the pregnancy. She knew this was the goal all along, but now that it was happening, it felt real and terrifying. After hanging up, Lucy sat on the bed for a few minutes, her hands trembling. The idea of carrying Ethan Carter's child, a man she barely knew and who seemed incapable of genuine emotion, felt heavier than she had imagined. Trying to pull herself together, she headed to the doctor's office that afternoon, accompanied by Stephanie. During the ultrasound, it was confirmed. She was pregnant. The doctor explained that everything was progressing as planned and that she appeared to be in excellent health for the start of the pregnancy. Lucy stared at the ultrasound screen, looking at the small dot that marked the beginning of a life. A wave of mixed emotions hit her: relief, fear, and unexpectedly, a faint glimmer of hope. But when she returned to the mansion, Ethan was waiting for her in the main hall, his usual serious expression in place. "Stephanie told me you went to the doctor today," he began, as direct as ever. Lucy crossed her arms, already bracing for his cold tone. "Yes, I'm pregnant. Go ahead and celebrate. Your plan is working." Ethan ignored the sarcasm, though something about his posture seemed different. He gestured for Lucy to sit, but she remained standing, defiant. "I want to discuss a few things," he said, trying to keep his composure. "Of course you do," Lucy shot back with a dry laugh. "Everything has to be your way, doesn't it?" Ethan took a deep breath, clearly making an effort to stay calm. "Lucy, this isn't about control. It's about making sure everything goes well, for the child's sake." She narrowed her eyes at him. "Child? That's what you call it? Like it's just another piece in your game?" Ethan stood, his imposing height making Lucy feel small, but she didn't back down. "I don't expect you to understand my reasons," he said in a colder tone, "but you should know that everything I'm doing is to ensure this child's future." Lucy let out an exasperated sigh. "You talk like this is some noble act, Ethan, but in the end, it's all about you, your need for control, your ego." "And why did you agree to this then?" he shot back, his voice firm. "If it's so awful, why are you here?" His words hit her like a punch. Lucy knew exactly why she was there, but hearing it from Ethan brought all her guilt and anger bubbling to the surface. "I'm here because of my mother," she said, her voice shaking, "because she's sick and I didn't have any other choice." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan watched her, and for a moment it seemed like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. In the days that followed, the tension between them only grew. Ethan kept his distance but made a point to attend every medical appointment and meeting with the specialists. His demeanor remained the same, cold, practical, and methodical. Lucy, on the other hand, felt suffocated by the lack of freedom. The mansion, which once seemed luxurious and comfortable, now felt like a gilded cage. Every step she took seemed monitored, and every decision she tried to make was questioned or adjusted by Ethan. One afternoon, Lucy was in the kitchen, trying to prepare something simple to eat, when Ethan walked in. "What are you doing?" he asked, frowning. "What does it look like?" "I'm making a sandwich," she replied without looking at him. "There are chefs hired for that," he said, crossing his arms. Lucy put the knife down on the counter and turned to face him. "You think I can't even make my own food now?" Ethan shrugged. "That's not it. I just think you should focus on resting and leave the other tasks to the people hired for that." Lucy let out a humorless laugh. "You know, Ethan, you don't understand what it means to be independent, do you? I've spent my entire life doing everything on my own, and now you want me to delegate even a sandwich?" Ethan was silent for a few seconds before responding. "I just want what's best for you and the baby." "The best for the baby or the best for you?" she shot back, her gaze challenging. Ethan didn't respond immediately, but his expression shifted, as if something she said had struck a nerve. "Lucy, I'm not your enemy," he said, his tone calmer than usual. "I want this to work, for all of us." She stared at him for a moment before shaking her head. "Then maybe you should start treating me like a person and not just a part of your plan." Ethan said nothing, but the silence between them was heavier than any argument they'd ever had. That night, Lucy sat on the balcony outside her room, gazing at the stars. The weight of her decision felt heavier than ever. She was there to save her mother, but the price seemed higher than she'd expected. Stephanie appeared at the door, interrupting her thoughts. "Lucy, may I come in?" "Sure," Lucy replied, waving her over. Stephanie sat next to her, wearing a compassionate expression. "I know this must be hard for you," Stephanie said softly. "But as hard as it is to believe, Mr. Carter cares. He just has a different way of showing it." Lucy let out a short laugh. "He has a terrible way of showing he cares." Stephanie smiled. "He's more complicated than he seems. But if I may say so, I think he's trying." Lucy stayed quiet, considering Stephanie's words. Maybe there was more to Ethan than she could see, but it was still hard to get past the coldness he kept between them. The next morning, Ethan appeared in the hallway as Lucy was getting ready to leave for another appointment. "Can I come with you today?" he asked, surprising her. Lucy frowned. "Since when do you ask for permission to do something?" Ethan gave a faint smile, a rare gesture. "I'm trying to follow your advice." She couldn't help but smile a little. "Well, in that case, let's go." Lucy sat in the waiting room at the doctor's office, nervously bouncing her leg. Ethan was beside her, scrolling through his phone, seemingly oblivious to the tension she was feeling. It was the first appointment since confirming the pregnancy, and while Lucy tried to stay calm, the thought of how fast her life was changing made her stomach churn. "Are you going to put that down at some point?" Lucy asked, glancing at Ethan, who was still typing on his phone. Ethan slowly looked up, his expression neutral. "I'm handling something important," he replied, turning his attention back to the screen. Lucy rolled her eyes. "Of course, because nothing is more important than work." Before Ethan could respond, the nurse appeared at the door and called Lucy's name. They stood up, and Ethan followed her into the exam room. When the doctor began the ultrasound, Lucy's heart raced as she saw the baby's image on the screen. It was small, but it was real. The doctor pointed out the heartbeat, a rhythmic sound that filled the room. Lucy held her breath, feeling something she hadn't expected, a connection. Ethan stood silently next to her, watching the screen with a slight frown. For the first time he seemed human. "That's the baby's heartbeat," the doctor said with a smile. Lucy glanced at Ethan, expecting a sarcastic comment, but he remained quiet. There was something in his expression she couldn't read, as if he were absorbing the moment in a way she hadn't anticipated. As they left the office, Ethan finally broke the silence. "It's strange," he said, looking at Lucy. "What is?" she asked, curious. "Hearing the baby's heartbeat, it makes everything feel real," he replied, almost hesitantly. Lucy was surprised. She hadn't expected that from Ethan, the man who treated everything like a business transaction. "Well, it is real, Ethan. A lot more real than any contract you've signed," she replied, her tone tinged with sarcasm. He didn't respond, but his silence said more than any words could. Back at the mansion, Lucy was trying to process what she had felt during the appointment. Seeing the baby on the ultrasound and hearing the heartbeat had stirred something in her, a sense of responsibility and protection she hadn't anticipated. As she walked through the garden, Stephanie appeared with a gentle smile. "How was the appointment?" she asked. Lucy hesitated before answering. "It was intense. Seeing the baby for the first time was different than I imagined." Stephanie nodded. "It's a transformative experience, even under the most unexpected circumstances." Lucy sighed, gazing at the horizon. "It's strange to think I'm doing this for someone else, but at the same time, I can't help feeling something for this baby." Stephanie placed a hand on Lucy's shoulder. "That's natural. You're human, Lucy. No matter how you got here, it's impossible not to form some kind of bond." Lucy nodded, but the weight of her emotions continued to grow. That evening, as Lucy sat on the balcony of her room, Ethan appeared again. He looked more relaxed than usual, though he still carried his usual serious demeanor. "You have a habit of showing up when I least expect it," Lucy said, glancing at him. Ethan shrugged. "I thought we could talk." She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Talk? That's new." Ethan ignored the comment and sat in one of the chairs beside her. "Today, at the doctor's office, it was strange for me," he began, looking up at the sky. "I never thought hearing a baby's heartbeat would affect me like it did." Lucy studied him, trying to understand what he was really feeling. Because you always want to control everything. But some things can't be controlled, Ethan. He looked at her, his eyes showing a vulnerability she rarely saw. Maybe you're right, but that doesn't make it any easier. No one said it would be easy, Lucy replied with a faint smile. The silence between them was different from the last time in the living room. It wasn't heavy or uncomfortable. For the first time, it felt like they were starting to understand something about each other. In the following days, Lucy and Ethan began to interact more, albeit subtly. Ethan made it a point to attend her appointments and seemed more interested in how she was doing. Though he still maintained his reserved nature, Lucy noticed small gestures that showed he was trying. One afternoon, as Lucy walked through the garden, she found Ethan sitting on a bench reading a report. He looked up and, to her surprise, smiled. "What?" she asked, skeptical. "Nothing. I was just thinking how you seem more comfortable here than before." Lucy crossed her arms, unsure how to respond. "I'm not exactly comfortable, but I think I'm getting used to it." Ethan closed the report and looked at her. "I know this isn't easy for you, but I want you to know I'm trying to do the best I can." Lucy was surprised by his honesty. "You really are trying, aren't you?" "Yes," he said sincerely. She sat down beside him, looking out at the horizon. "Maybe you're not as unbearable as I thought." Ethan chuckled, a rare sound that caught Lucy off guard. "And maybe you're stronger than I expected," he replied. The moment was brief but significant. For the first time, Lucy felt like she was starting to see the man behind Ethan Carter's facade. Lucy was in the kitchen, warming a cup of tea, when she heard Ethan's steady footsteps enter the room. It was rare to see him there, especially in such a casual moment. He looked less rigid than usual, wearing just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no tie in sight. "I didn't think you even knew where the kitchen was," Lucy said with a playful smile. Ethan shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Very funny. I just came to get some coffee." Lucy watched as he poured himself a cup, intrigued by how relaxed he seemed. There was something different about him that day. Something she couldn't quite place. "You seem less like a CEO today," she said, sipping her tea. Ethan let out a quiet laugh, a rare sound that surprised her. "Even I need a break sometimes." Lucy raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "You? A break? That's new." Ethan leaned against the counter, staring at the coffee cup in his hands. "Sometimes I feel like my life is a machine I built myself, and now I don't know how to stop it." The confession was so unexpected that Lucy was momentarily speechless. She hadn't expected to hear something so vulnerable from him. "Then why don't you try turning off the machine for a while?" she asked softly. Ethan shrugged, as if the idea were impossible. "Because if I stop, who's to say things will keep working?" Lucy studied him carefully. For the first time, she felt like she was seeing the real Ethan, a man who, beneath all the control and perfection, carried a heavy emotional burden. "Have you always been like this? Always needed to control everything?" she asked directly. Ethan hesitated, as though deciding whether to answer. Finally, he sighed and stepped away from the counter, looking out the window. "My childhood was complicated," he began, his voice quieter. "My father was a hard man, cold and demanding. Nothing was ever good enough for him." Lucy felt a pang in her chest hearing that. "That explains a lot," she said softly. Ethan continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "When my mother died, I was 14. She was the only one who tried to protect me from him. After she was gone, everything got worse." Lucy moved closer, setting her teacup on the counter. "And you decided that to survive, you had to be perfect, didn't you?" Ethan looked at her, surprised by how accurate her words were. "Yes, I guess I did." There was a moment of silence between them, as Lucy processed everything he'd just said. "Ethan, you don't have to be like him," she said finally. "You can be different." Ethan turned away, as if unsure how to respond. "Maybe," he said quietly before leaving the kitchen. In the days that followed, Lucy couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. For the first time, she felt like she truly understood Ethan. He wasn't just a cold, controlling CEO. There were layers of pain and fear he kept hidden from the world. Still, Ethan maintained his emotional distance. He made sure to be present at her appointments and involved himself in every detail of the pregnancy, but he rarely let his emotions show. One afternoon, while reading in the garden, Lucy saw Ethan approaching. He looked uncomfortable, as though debating with himself whether or not to speak to her. "Lucy, can I sit down?" he finally asked. "Of course," she replied, curious. Ethan sat next to her on the bench but remained silent for a few moments. "I've been thinking about what you said in the kitchen," he began, gazing out at the horizon. "About being different from your father?" Lucy asked, closing her book and turning to face him. Ethan nodded. "It's never been easy for me to admit that I'm afraid." Lucy stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. "Afraid I'm not good enough, afraid of making mistakes, and now, afraid of being a father." Lucy felt a lump in her throat at his confession. It was the first time Ethan spoke about the baby in such a personal way. "Every parent is afraid, Ethan," she said gently. "That's normal." Ethan looked at her, his eyes showing a vulnerability he rarely revealed. "But what if I'm like him? What if I don't know how to be a good father?" Lucy placed her hand over his instinctively, sincerely. "You're already different from him. Just the fact that you care about this makes you a better father than he ever was." Ethan didn't respond, but Lucy could see her words had struck a chord. As the pregnancy progressed, Lucy began to notice small changes in Ethan. He was more present, not just physically, but emotionally. He asked how she was feeling, showed genuine interest during ultrasounds, and even suggested ideas for the baby's nursery. One day, while they were looking at nursery designs, Lucy couldn't help but smile. "I never thought I'd see you picking out wall colors," she teased. Ethan chuckled, something that was becoming more common. "Neither did I." Lucy realized she was starting to enjoy his company. He was still intense and controlling, but now she could see the human side beneath the facade. One evening, while organizing some clothes, Lucy noticed a small box on top of a dresser. She didn't recognize it and, curious, opened it to see what was inside. She found a photo of Ethan with his mother, both smiling. He looked much younger, almost unrecognizable. When Ethan walked into the room and saw her holding the photo, he froze. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice tense. "It was up here. I didn't know you kept something like this," Lucy said, watching him carefully. Ethan took the photo and stared at it for a few moments. "My mother meant everything to me," he said quietly. "She was the only one who understood me." Lucy felt her heart ache at the pain in his voice. "You still miss her, don't you?" Ethan nodded but didn't say anything else. Lucy realized that, despite all the barriers he had built, Ethan still carried the scars of his past. The next morning, Lucy went down to the living room, still processing her conversation with Ethan from the night before. There was something different about him, and she couldn't deny she was starting to see him in a new light. As she entered the room, she was surprised by an unusual sight. Ethan stood beside Stephanie, with several open boxes spread across the table. "What's all this?" Lucy asked, frowning. Ethan glanced at her and motioned for her to come closer. "These are things for the baby's room," he said, as if it were obvious. Lucy was momentarily speechless. "You bought all this?" Ethan shrugged. "I thought it was time to start getting everything ready." She picked up one of the items from the table, a soft blanket with tiny star patterns. The gesture was simple, yet it carried an unexpected emotional weight. "This is unexpected," Lucy said, with a timid smile. "I want the baby to have everything it needs," Ethan explained, almost defensively, as though justifying his actions. Stephanie left them alone, as Ethan began showing Lucy the other items he had picked out. She realized he had thought of everything: clothes, toys, even a crib that was yet to be assembled. "You've really thought of every detail," Lucy said as she examined a small pair of baby shoes. "I don't do things halfway," Ethan replied with a slight smile. Lucy laughed. "Yeah, I've noticed." They spent the morning organizing the items and discussing where everything would go in the baby's room. For the first time, Lucy felt like they were working together, not just following one of Ethan's meticulously laid out plans. Later, as Lucy walked through the garden to clear her mind, Ethan appeared at her side. "Are you okay?" he asked, breaking the silence. "I'm fine. There's a lot to process," she said, gazing at the horizon. Ethan nodded, walking beside her. "I know all of this feels surreal, but I want you to know I'm trying to do what's best for you and the baby." Lucy looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "I can see that." You've changed a lot since we started this, Ethan. He let out a brief laugh. I think you're changing too. Lucy smiled but didn't respond. She knew he was right. The pregnancy, living with Ethan, everything was transforming her in ways she didn't yet fully understand. That evening, Lucy went to the kitchen to grab something to eat and found Ethan sitting at the table alone with a glass of wine. It was rare to see him so relaxed, and it piqued her curiosity. Are you okay? She asked, taking a sip of water. Ethan looked up at her and gave a faint smile. Just thinking. Lucy sat across from him, studying his expression. About what? He swirled the wine in his glass, thoughtful. About how much has changed since this all began. Lucy raised an eyebrow. And what's your conclusion? Ethan took a deep breath before answering. That no matter how much I plan, I can't control everything. Lucy chuckled, shaking her head. I think you're finally starting to understand what I've been saying all along. Ethan gave her a small smile. Maybe you're right. The moment was brief but meaningful. Lucy realized Ethan was beginning to accept that not everything in life could be anticipated or controlled. A significant step for someone like him. In the days that followed, Ethan became even more involved in preparing for the baby's arrival. He accompanied Lucy to appointments, helped make decisions about the nursery, and even suggested hiring a photographer to document the pregnancy. One afternoon, as Lucy rested on the couch, Ethan walked into the room with a book in hand. What's that? She asked, curious. A book about parenting, he replied, sitting down beside her. Lucy laughed. You, reading a book about how to be a dad? I never thought I'd see the day. Neither did I, he admitted with a faint smile. Lucy took the book and flipped through a few pages. Looks like you're really taking this seriously. I am. I want to do this right. She fell silent for a moment, studying him. For the first time, she felt like she could trust that Ethan wasn't just a cold, calculating man, but someone who genuinely wanted to be a good father. That night, as Lucy prepared for bed, she received a text from Stephanie saying that Ethan had planned something special for the next day. Intrigued, Lucy couldn't help but wonder what he was up to. The following morning, Lucy was taken to a small photography studio in Los Angeles. Ethan waited outside with a reserved smile. What are we doing here? She asked, skeptical. I wanted you to have something to remember this experience, he replied. Lucy hesitated, but eventually agreed. During the photo session, Ethan surprised her by suggesting that he join in for a few pictures. Seriously? You want to be in the photos? She asked, incredulous. Why not? It's important, he replied firmly. Lucy smiled and nodded. As they posed for the pictures, she noticed something different about Ethan. He seemed more relaxed, more willing to engage with the moment. At the end of the session, as they reviewed the photos on the monitor, Lucy couldn't help but smile. I think this was a good idea, she admitted. Ethan nodded. Maybe I have good ideas every now and then. Lucy chuckled, shaking her head. Maybe. The next morning, Lucy woke up early, feeling the baby move more intensely for the first time. It was a strange yet exciting sensation that made her smile without realizing it. As she gently placed her hand on her belly, her thoughts drifted to everything that had happened in the past few months. Her relationship with Ethan had changed in ways she never expected, but there was still something about his behavior that kept her on edge. She headed downstairs to the kitchen, where she found Ethan sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. He looked up at her with a neutral expression, though there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite decipher. Good morning, he said, setting the newspaper aside. Good morning, Lucy replied, pouring herself a glass of juice. How are you feeling? Ethan asked, watching her closely. Lucy hesitated before answering. Good. Actually, I felt the baby move this morning. It was different. Ethan raised his eyebrows, genuinely interested. Really? What was it like? She gave a small smile, surprised by his curiosity. It was strange, but good. I think it's starting to feel more real. Ethan nodded, seeming lost in thought for a moment before changing the subject. Stephanie scheduled another ultrasound for this week. I want to make sure everything is fine. Lucy noticed that Ethan was more involved than ever. He seemed determined to ensure everything went perfectly, but she still wondered how much of it was about the baby and how much was about his need for control. Later that day, Lucy received a call from the hospital, informing her that her mother, Grace, had been admitted again. The news caught her off guard, and she quickly started gathering her things to head to the hospital. Ethan walked in as she grabbed her bag. "What happened?" he asked, noticing her worried expression. "My mom's been admitted," Lucy said without looking at him. "I need to get there now." "I'll go with you," Ethan said, surprising her. "You don't have to. I can handle this on my own," Lucy replied, but Ethan had already grabbed his car keys. "I'm not asking. Let's go." Lucy didn't have time to argue. When they arrived at the hospital, they found Grace resting in a modest room. Lucy sat by her bedside, gently holding her hand. "Mom, I'm here," she said softly. Grace slowly opened her eyes, a weak smile forming on her face when she saw Lucy. "Are you okay, sweetheart? And the baby?" "We're fine, Mom. Don't worry about that right now." Ethan stood silently nearby, watching their interaction. He seemed out of place, as though he didn't know how to act in such an emotional situation. When the doctor came in, he explained that Grace's condition was critical and that her care would need to be intensified. Lucy felt the weight of his words. But before she could ask about the costs, Ethan stepped in. "Make sure she gets the best possible care." "The cost isn't an issue," he said firmly. Lucy turned to him, both surprised and grateful. "Thank you, Ethan," she said sincerely. Ethan simply nodded, as if trying to downplay the gesture. In the days that followed, Lucy divided her time between the hospital and the mansion. Ethan accompanied her whenever he could, and it began to change how she saw him. He wasn't just the cold, calculating man she had met at the beginning. He was showing a more human side, something she never expected. One evening, as they sat in the hospital, Lucy glanced at Ethan as he read a report on his tablet. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, breaking the silence. Ethan looked up. "Doing what?" "Helping my mom. You didn't have to do this." Ethan sighed, setting the tablet aside. "Because it's the right thing to do." Lucy narrowed her eyes, trying to understand. "You're not someone who does things just because they're the right thing to do." Ethan chuckled softly, though there was a hint of bitterness in his tone. "Maybe I'm trying to be someone different," he said, looking directly at her. Lucy sat in silence, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. A week later, Grace was discharged from the hospital and returned home. Though still fragile, she was improving. Ethan arranged for a nurse to assist her, which deeply moved Lucy, though she tried to hide it. That evening, as they had dinner together, Ethan asked a question that caught Lucy off guard. "What do you want to do after the baby is born?" Lucy stopped eating and looked at him cautiously. "What do you mean by that?" Ethan set his utensils down and folded his hands on the table. "I want to know what your plans are." Lucy hesitated, feeling a tightness in her chest. "I don't know. I guess I haven't thought that far ahead." "Maybe you should," he said calmly. "Have you decided what you're going to do about the baby?" she asked, trying to mask the tension in her voice. Ethan was silent for a moment before replying. "I'm still figuring it out." Lucy's heart sank at his vague response. "You talk about it like it's just another business decision." "It's not," he said firmly, "but I need to think about what's best for him." Lucy didn't know what to say. For the first time, she felt afraid of what might happen once the baby arrived. The next day, as they worked on the baby's room, Lucy finally confronted Ethan. "What do you really want, Ethan?" she asked, her voice heavy with emotion. Ethan stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. "I want to make sure he has the best future possible." "That doesn't answer my question. Do you want to be part of his life, or do you just want to make sure he has what he needs?" Ethan was silent, as though wrestling with his own thoughts. "I don't know," he admitted finally. Lucy felt tears welling up in her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Maybe you should figure it out before it's too late," she said before leaving the room. Later that night, Ethan knocked on Lucy's door. "Can I come in?" he asked. Lucy nodded, still hurt by their earlier conversation. Ethan sat in a chair near the window, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "I'm not good at this, Lucy. I never have been." She looked at him silently, waiting for him to continue. "But I want to try," he said softly. "I want to be a real father to him." Lucy felt a wave of relief and emotion wash over her. "Then start now, Ethan. Show me you're capable." He nodded, and for a moment, they just looked at each other, sharing an unspoken understanding. Lucy couldn't sleep that night. At this stage in her pregnancy, the physical discomfort was compounded by the flood of emotions running through her. The baby's movements were constant, reminding her how close she was to giving birth. She still felt uncertain about how everything would unfold once the baby arrived, and especially about how Ethan would handle it all. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed more determined than ever. Since their conversation, in which he admitted wanting to be a real father, he had become more present, genuinely involved in every detail. Yet Lucy knew that beneath his dedication, there were doubts he hadn't fully resolved. The next morning, Lucy was in the living room when a sharp pain shot through her belly. She grabbed the arm of the sofa, trying to catch her breath, but the pain returned, even stronger. Stephanie, passing through the hallway, noticed and rushed to her side. "Lucy, what's wrong?" Stephanie asked, concerned. I think it's time," Lucy said, gasping. Stephanie didn't waste a moment. She called for Ethan, who appeared within seconds, already grabbing his car keys. "We're going to the hospital now," he said firmly, leaving no room for argument. The drive to the hospital was tense. Lucy was anxious, trying to manage the pain and fear she felt. Ethan, behind the wheel, stayed calm, though Lucy could see his knuckles turning white as he gripped the steering wheel. "It's going to be okay, Lucy," he said, trying to reassure her. She nodded but couldn't bring herself to speak. When they arrived at the hospital, Lucy was quickly taken to the delivery room. Ethan tried to follow, but the nurses stopped him. "She needs to get prepped. Please wait here, Mr. Carter," one of the nurses said before disappearing through the doors. Ethan stood in the hallway, his heart pounding faster than he cared to admit. He had never felt so out of control in his entire life. Hours passed, and finally, a doctor appeared to inform them that the delivery was underway. Ethan was allowed into the delivery room, where he found Lucy exhausted but determined. "You're here," she said, surprised to see him. "Of course I am," he replied, moving closer and taking her hand. The delivery was a mix of pain and emotion. When the baby's cry echoed through the room, a wave of relief and happiness washed over Lucy. The doctor held up the baby and showed him to both of them. "Congratulations, it's a healthy boy," the doctor said with a smile. Ethan stood silent, staring at the baby with an expression Lucy had never seen before. He seemed lost, almost vulnerable. When the doctor placed the baby in Lucy's arms, tears streamed down her face. He was small, perfect, and so fragile. "He's beautiful," Lucy whispered, glancing at Ethan. Ethan stepped closer, looking at the baby in her arms. "Yes, he is," he said softly. Later, as Lucy rested, a nurse brought the baby to Ethan so he could hold him for the first time. He hesitated, looking as though he was afraid of hurting the tiny life in his arms. "I've never done this before," he admitted, looking at Lucy. "No one is born knowing how, Ethan," she said with a tired smile. Ethan carefully held the baby, feeling a warmth he couldn't explain as he looked into the little face. He had never imagined something could move him this deeply, but here he was, feeling a connection he didn't think was possible. As he cradled the baby, something shifted in his expression. "Lucy," he said, his voice low but steady, "I want you to stay." Lucy frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Ethan took a deep breath before replying. "I don't want you to leave when the contract ends. I want you to stay here, with him, with me." Lucy was silent, shocked and moved by his words. "Ethan, are you sure?" "Absolutely. I can't imagine raising this baby without you." Tears began to fall from Lucy's eyes. She had never expected to hear this from Ethan, but deep down she knew he was sincere. "I don't want to leave either," she finally said. In the days that followed, Ethan and Lucy returned to the mansion with the baby, whom they decided to name Oliver. The dynamic between them had completely changed. Lucy noticed that Ethan was genuinely committed to being a present father and a better partner. He insisted on getting up in the middle of the night to help with Oliver, something she never imagined he would do. "You're doing a good job," Lucy said one night as she watched Ethan rocking Oliver in his arms. "I'm learning," he replied with a genuine smile. Lucy realized that the Ethan she had met at the beginning was no longer the same man. He was still determined and meticulous, but now there was something more. Love. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden with Oliver, Ethan took Lucy's hand and looked into her eyes. "Lucy, I want to make this official," he said. "Make what official?" she asked, confused. Ethan pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. revealing a simple but elegant ring. "I want you in my life forever, not just as Oliver's mother, but as my wife." Tears streamed down Lucy's face again. "Ethan, are you serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life," he replied. Lucy looked at him, seeing the man he had become. He still had his flaws, but he was willing to change, and that meant everything to her. "Yes," she finally said. "I want to stay." Ethan smiled, cupping her face before leaning in to kiss her. For the first time, Lucy felt she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks following Oliver's birth were intense. Lucy and Ethan were adjusting to their new lives as parents, and while there were moments of connection and joy, not everything was perfect. Despite his visible changes, Ethan still struggled with his need for control. "You need to let me handle this, Ethan," Lucy said one morning as he watched Oliver sleeping in the crib. "I know you want to be involved, but sometimes it feels like you're trying to do everything yourself." Ethan turned to her, arms crossed. "I'm just trying to make sure everything goes right. I want the best for him." "I understand, but that doesn't mean you have to be in charge of every little detail. Parenting isn't a business project." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't want to make mistakes, Lucy. I don't want to be like my father." Lucy stepped closer and placed a hand on his arm. "Ethan, you've already proven you're nothing like him. But you need to trust me more. We're in this together." Ethan remained silent, but Lucy could see her words sinking in. Despite a few small tensions, they were starting to find their balance. Lucy was becoming more comfortable in the mansion, and her relationship with Ethan continued to grow in unexpected ways. But things took a sudden turn when Lucy received a call from the hospital about her mother. "She's gotten worse," said the doctor on the other end. "We recommend you come immediately." Lucy felt the ground disappear beneath her. Without wasting a moment, she grabbed Oliver and called for Ethan, who immediately dropped everything to go with her. At the hospital, Grace looked even more fragile than the last time Lucy saw her. Lucy sat by her bedside, gripping her hand tightly. "Mom, I'm here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Grace slowly opened her eyes, looking first at Lucy, then at Ethan, who stood nearby holding Oliver. "You've done well, my daughter," Grace said with a faint smile. "You found someone who truly cares." Lucy felt tears streaming down her face. "I just want you to get better, Mom." Grace squeezed Lucy's hand with the little strength she had left. "You and this baby are my greatest joy, and now I can rest peacefully, knowing you have a family." Lucy tried to respond, but her voice failed her. Grace closed her eyes, and the monitor beside the bed emitted a flat tone. The doctor entered, but Lucy already knew. Her mother was gone. The days that followed were incredibly hard for Lucy. The void left by her mother's death felt overwhelming, but Ethan was there for her every step of the way, supporting her in ways she never expected. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said as he held her in his arms the night after the funeral. Lucy looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Losing Grace brought significant changes for Lucy. She realized she needed to treasure what she had around her even more, Ethan and Oliver included. At the same time, she began to wonder about the future. One evening, while they were in the living room, Lucy finally voiced something that had been on her mind. "Ethan, now that my mom is gone, I'm wondering what's going to happen with us." Ethan placed Oliver in the portable crib and sat beside her. "What do you mean?" "I want to know if what we're building here is real. Are we a real family, or are we just people brought together by circumstances?" Ethan was quiet for a moment before answering. "Lucy, all of this started as a contract. I know that, but it's not like that anymore." She looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "It's not?" "No," he said, taking her hand. "You and Oliver mean everything to me now. I never thought I'd say this, but you're my family." Lucy felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of relief and happiness. "So, what happens now?" she asked. Ethan smiled, a smile that seemed filled with certainty. "Now we move forward, together." As the months passed, Lucy and Ethan grew closer than ever. Oliver was thriving, and life at the mansion finally felt balanced. But Ethan still had one last surprise for Lucy. One evening, he led her to the garden, where a table was set under the stars, decorated with candles and flowers. Lucy frowned, confused. "What's this?" she asked as Ethan guided her to the table. Just something I wanted to do, he said, his tone mysterious. After dinner, Ethan stood up and took a small box from his pocket. Lucy felt her heart race. Lucy, you've changed my life in ways I never imagined. You've made me a better person, a better father, and now I want to be more than that. He got down on one knee and opened the box to reveal a stunning ring. Lucy Scott, will you marry me? Lucy brought her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Ethan, of course I will. He slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a tight embrace. The day of Lucy and Ethan's wedding arrived like a gentle breeze, carrying with it the promise of a new beginning. The mansion had been transformed into a dreamlike setting, with delicate lights strung among the trees and flowers carefully arranged throughout. The golden glow of the setting sun bathed the garden as a small group of guests took their seats outdoors. In her room, Lucy stood gazing at her reflection in the mirror. Her simple white dress hugged her figure elegantly, and a lace veil draped softly over her shoulders. As she adjusted the necklace her mother had given her years ago, a wave of emotion swept over her. She was about to marry a man she never imagined she could love just months ago. Stephanie entered the room with a warm smile. You look stunning, Lucy. Ethan's going to be speechless when he sees you. Lucy smiled, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done, Stephanie. There's no need to thank me, Stephanie replied, holding Lucy's hands. You deserve this, and so does Ethan. Lucy took a deep breath, wiping away the tears before they could smudge her makeup. I'm ready, she said at last. Ethan stood at the improvised altar, dressed in a flawless suit. Outwardly he appeared calm, but inside he felt a mix of nerves and excitement. When the music began and Lucy appeared at the end of the aisle, accompanied by a close friend, the world seemed to slow down. She looked radiant, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt that everything in his life made sense. Their eyes met as Lucy walked toward him, and in that moment, there were no doubts or uncertainties, only love and the promise of a future together. When they reached the altar, the officiant began the ceremony with words that reflected the unique path that had brought them together. Today, we celebrate love that often begins in the most unexpected places, he said, smiling at the couple. Lucy and Ethan exchanged vows that were simple, yet deeply meaningful. Lucy, you came into my life and transformed everything I thought I knew about love and family. I promise to be the best man, the best father, and the best partner I can be for you. Every day of my life, Ethan said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. Lucy held back tears as she replied, Ethan, you've shown me that even the most guarded hearts can open. You've given me a home, a family, and a new reason to believe. I promise to stand by your side, through good times and bad, building our future together. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the guests erupted into applause as Ethan pulled Lucy into a kiss, sealing the promises they had made. The reception was intimate, but filled with joy. Lucy held Oliver in her arms as she chatted with guests, her smile never leaving her face. Ethan, standing beside her, was the picture of happiness. For the first time in his life, he felt he had nothing to prove. He had found something no amount of money could buy: a family. As they danced under the stars, Ethan leaned in and whispered into Lucy's ear, "Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't deserve it." Lucy smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You deserve all of this, Ethan, and so much more." In the months that followed, life settled into a peaceful and happy rhythm. Lucy and Ethan began working together on projects to help families in need, inspired by her journey as a single mother and his transformation. The mansion, which once felt cold and impersonal, was now a true home. Oliver grew up healthy and surrounded by love, while Lucy and Ethan embraced the joys and challenges of parenthood. One afternoon, as they played with Oliver in the garden, Ethan turned to Lucy with a smile. "You know, I never thought life would be like this," he said. "Like what?" Lucy asked, curious. "So, simple and perfect. I spent so much time trying to control everything, planning every detail, but it wasn't until I stopped fighting that everything fell into place." Lucy smiled, gently stroking his cheek. "Sometimes, all we need to do is let life surprise us." A few months later, Lucy discovered she was pregnant again. The news was met with joy and tears. This time, there were no contracts, expectations, or fears, just happiness at building their family together. Ethan threw himself even more into his roles as a father and husband, sharing every responsibility with Lucy and showing her daily how much he had changed. One night, as they tucked Oliver into bed, Lucy turned to Ethan and said, "You've become an amazing man, Ethan." He pulled her into an embrace, kissing her forehead. "That's because of you, Lucy. You showed me what really matters." The birth of their second child, a baby girl they named Emily, brought even more light into their family. Ethan, once incapable of expressing his emotions, cried as he held his daughter for the first time. Lucy knew then that this was the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Years later, Lucy and Ethan sat in the garden of their mansion, now filled with the laughter and energy of their 3 children, Oliver, Emily, and their youngest, Noah. The house was alive with love, memories, and joy. Holding Lucy's hand, Ethan looked at her and said, "If I could go back in time, I'd do it all over again. Every mistake, every obstacle, because it all led me here." Lucy smiled, leaning in to kiss him. "And I'd do it all over again too, because it was all worth it." As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Lucy and Ethan watched their children playing, feeling grateful for everything they had built together. They knew challenges still lay ahead, but they were ready for anything. After all, they had found what they had always been searching for: love, family, and a home. Do you think Lucy made the right choice in forgiving and marrying Ethan? Share your opinion in the comments. How would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And make sure to check out more heartfelt stories by clicking here on the end screen.